Welcome, everyone, to the 36th California Small Farm Conference. My name is Guido, and I'm a Communications and Events Manager with CAF, which stands for Community Alliance with Family Farmers. We have two amazing speakers today that I'm so glad that joined us for this workshop called Hit the Books. It's a cool name. But before we start, and I give them the mic, I just wanted to remind you that this workshop is being recorded, and that if you have any questions for the speakers, you can always use the chat or the Q&A feature. And we'll be making sure that they'll get them and that they can answer them. So yeah, I don't have much more to say, but to thank our sponsors for making this possible, the conference. And yeah, if you want to just take it on, Asia, Francis, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Guido. We're delighted to be here. And we hope that hit the books. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I hope that doesn't mean people are like so frustrated they want to hit their books, but we want to actually get down to doing our books. We wanted to let you all know that we put out the actually, first of all, I will say, while we're doing all this intro conversation, if you could put anything, introduce yourself, your farm, if you're a farm, your organization, if you're an organization person, service provider, where you are, what do you want to learn related to bookkeeping, or what problem are you trying to solve today? So that's what we are here. And we did a presentation last year in 2023, and we submitted this proposal a while ago, and as we've been Asia and I've been talking about it, we kind of changed some of our perspective, but we looked over how we described it, and we think we pretty much covered everything. So, however, if you feel like there's something you were expecting to get today and you aren't seeing it, please let us know. And the other main thing we did was we really wanted this year to be more about your questions, because we felt like we were just steamrolling everybody with information last year. Also, the slides from last year are attached in our session in the schedule. So you're welcome to download those slides, which go into more detail about some things that we're not going to go into as much detail about this year. Also, I want to say a big thank you to Poppy Davis, because a lot of this that we're talking is modified, adapted from, but based on the Resilierator program that California Farm Link has. And so Poppy Davis has just been an amazing support. I like very much, it's so true, on CAF's intro page, they say, she is way more fun than her legal and accounting background and relentless focus on policies and procedures and professional ethics would suggest. And it's totally true. She's a lot of fun, but she's really on things. So next, a quick little I guess I got, sorry, I get so nervous at the beginning of these. A little introduction of ourselves. Asia, how about you go first, please?
Sure thing, Francis, thanks. And I'm just gonna, real quick, y'all, copy and paste the introduction question in the chat so people can keep answering it as we go through our slideshow here. Because these images are our cues for what to talk about. So appreciate your rolling with this. So my name is Asia Hampton. I'm the business skills advisor at California Farm Link. My role involves connecting farmers internally to our program resources and loan resources. And I'm also continuously working on expanding the ecosystem of agriculturally focused service providers like lawyers, bookkeepers, accountants that we can refer our clients to, because we, as of yet, don't offer a lot of those services in-house. But we're also invested in building local economies and supporting those people who have those professions in your community. So always send good service providers our way, please. And I'll share my journey to bookkeeping includes managing a CSA and a value-added product line of pickles in an urban setting where we were sourcing produce from farmers who were already coming into the Bay Area to sell their produce, and nonprofit management. And so I had to just learn by doing, like out of necessity, small organization, wearing a lot of hats, etc. And so that's how I came into bookkeeping, and I was able to sort of transform my thinking around it from being really burdensome in addition to all the tasks that I was doing to actually being a pretty liberating practice of getting down to knowing the nitty-gritty of my numbers. And then I could answer questions that staff were shooting my way, like, can we get paid more hourly? What benefits can we offer? And so I think that businesses, budgets are tied into your values. And so how you manage your finances can really show where your values are as a business. And I will pass it to Francis.
Super. Thanks so much, Asia. It's always so fun to work with Asia. We have a good old time. So I'm Frances Andrews, and I do bookkeeping, and it's mostly with nonprofits and small farmers. And I also was a small organic farmer for about a decade, but I didn't actually start out being either of those things. I ended up at Full Belly Farm quite a few years ago as an intern, taking a break from my regular life. And I fell in love with farming. And I was very fortunate that after a couple of years there, I was able to become I was a co-farmer, co-owner of a farm in Solano County. So while I was there, I ended up turning out I was the one who was good at doing the bookkeeping, the finances, the business side of things. And that actually served me well. Life changes, y'all know. And so I left the farm after about 10 years. And it turned out that bookkeeping was a really good fit for me. I started out with the Center for Land-Based Learning, and then I've moved on to working with different people. Most recently, I'm currently working with CAF, who's putting on this great session, although I'm working with their books, their nonprofit books. And someone asked that question, what's the difference between nonprofit and profit bookkeeping? Very good question. And I'm also working with some small farmer clients. And what Asia and I found as we were doing this was that there's so many different things that farmers have different questions depending on their situation. So it's kind of why we changed the format of this thing, because we want more questions from you. So please, bring those questions up. Someone else probably has it, or it could, anyway, they're all so different. They're all good questions. So we've got plenty to say ourselves, but we want to hear from y'all too. So I mentioned that this slideshow in this presentation is based on the Resilierator. So Asia's going to tell you a little bit about this fabulous program that California Farm Link offers.
Yeah, so one of the courses that we offer at California Farm Link is called the Resilierator. It's a business accelerator for farms that have been in business at least 2 years, because we want to make sure you have data to work with. And so we have the course page that I'm going to drop in the chat here for everyone to visit in case you're interested. But essentially it's a 10-week program that's in the fall to be accessible for farmers, ideally during your slow season. And it's a great course. A lot of what you're going to see today gets covered in that. And we also have the Employment Resilierator. So for people who complete the Resilierator and are looking to dive deeper into like the employment conversation of their business, we also just rolled out that program this year. So visit our website, check it out, and I'll pass it back to Frances.
Yes, definitely do check it out. We are unapologetic promoters of these programs. I love them. I've done the program for service providers twice. And so if you are a service provider out there, I highly recommend. It'll be happening again in the fall, I hope. And I've taken it twice, and there's always new things to learn. So let's see, let's go on over to the overview. And I will also say, I've noticed, I'm looking at the chat that's coming in. Thank you so much for all identifying yourselves and putting in some comments about Oh man, this is great. We're already starting with lots of good questions. People starting out, which is great because it's a lot easier if you started out right. Okay, so I'm just thinking, we'll go ahead, we'll do a little overview and then jump into answering some of these questions. So this does have some overlap with last year's slides, but once again, if you want to get those, they're on our session description and have more detail about something. So we're going to talk about why bookkeeping is important. We're going to talk about why small businesses, not just farmers, but we are specifically talking about farmers, don't do it, time, money, not realizing how helpful it really can be in decision making. So we'll also talk about bookkeeping basics. And I know it sounds kind of, we talked back and forth about how basic to get and decided we'd rather err on the side of basic because the most important, the biggest problem we find is people just don't do it, and maybe because it feels so overwhelming. So we want we want farmers, small farmers, to do their books, learn a way that it works for them and not feel so overwhelmed, because at the bottom of the pyramid, it's pretty straightforward. But if you start getting up the pyramid a ways, it can get very complicated. So start basic, at least get the data in. So we'll talk about that solid foundation, consistent data entry and workflows, and reviewing your data regularly. So, and we're going to take time to talk about questions. So why is bookkeeping important? Well, so you can keep on farming. We would all like to think that maybe we don't have to deal with money. I mean, I know there are a lot of farmers who I know you didn't go into this because you wanted to deal with money and you wanted to be a small business person. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but most people are farming because they love what they're doing. Artists have the same issues too. But we live in a world that you want to be sustainable, your lifestyle as well. And we want you to keep on farming, because if you don't make enough money, you won't continue farming, and we want you to continue farming. I think people mistakenly think that you can't well, there's that old awful thing that money is capitalism is evil, so we don't want to deal with it. But it doesn't have to be that way. So, and if you don't keep your books, you're losing out on things like loan and grant eligibility, your taxes and compliance, whether that's just your income taxes at the end of the year, whether you have sales tax or payroll tax. If you keep track of things, they'll all be easier to deal with. And most importantly, perhaps what people forget about is to make well-informed decisions. Can I afford to hire an employee this summer? Can I buy this XYZ? And if you're doing this based on facts instead of just flying blind, it's much less stressful. So we want to convince you that it's worth doing your books, and also to answer those questions. So on to our next one, Asia. What is that? So what is bookkeeping for? So it's a source of information for your financial accounting, and which is your reports that come out of your bookkeeping. It's for your tax accounting. And do be clear that tax accounting and your books for your business are not always going to look the same, because there's some different things that happen. But the source data is from your bookkeeping. It's all about garbage in, garbage out. You aren't going to get the information you need out of it unless you've put the information in. And then managerial accounting, and that mostly happens in spreadsheets, but you still need your bookkeeping system to put the data in. So yeah, so let's go. What do we have next here, Asia? Oh, tell you what, let's pause for the poll. And while we're pausing for the poll, which Asia will put up there, I'm going to look through some of your questions in the chat and see what we've got. Okay, we've got folks from CLBL's Farm Academy and lots of different farms, vineyards. Let's see. Ania says, I am trying to understand best practices for farm-specific accounting and how I can strategically plan cash flow, tax benefits, etc. We are going to talk a bit about cash flow a little bit later. Frederic wants to actually, can everybody see the poll? Is it up there?
I don't think we have the poll, but I can copy and paste the question into the chat.
Oh, I guess we forgot to check that out before. Okay, well, c'est la vie. We shall continue on. Our questions on that, I'll read them out here. Also, where are you in your business journey? And I'll admit the questions are directed to farmers, not if you're a service provider. Are you just getting started? Are you in the beginning stages? Are you well established? Or somewhere in between. And some of you have already said this in the chat. How many years are you in your business? And are you tracking your finances? And if so, how are you tracking them? So I see some people already are. Let's see. We are going to talk about best practices and cash flow, making sure you set up things properly, maintaining the books instead of trying to play catch up. Yes, Frederic, we don't want it. Yeah. Curious on what I should expect accounting services to provide. I'm going to write that down. Okay. And checklists. We actually have a couple of those. Excellent. How to get started with bookkeeping and best practices. We're going on. We've got lots here in our, how does bookkeeping for a nonprofit differ from one that's profit? Let's see, looks like we've got quite a few answers. I'll tell you, I'll answer that really, well, I can't answer that very fully, but it does differ quite a bit if you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. And we are talking to for-profits. So if we get to the end and we have some time, and if you're thinking about your farm being a nonprofit, we can address that, but that's not mainly what we're focusing on here. We are focusing on the for-profits. So what have we got here? We've got, okay, it looks to me, what do you think, Asia? It looks like got a lot of people fairly early in their journey.
Yeah, I would
So
agree.
that's okay, Darlene, that you thought it started at 1:30. It's mostly been information, introductory here.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Can I add a note too?
Yes.
It would be great if folks enter their questions, if you have a specific question, into the Q&A function, because they're easier to track than in the chat for us. So it's just a little bit challenging to scroll back, but we want to continue to see your feedback roll in. So if you just have comments, please put them in the chat. If you have a specific question, please put it in the Q&A function if you can, so we can track it.
Absolutely. That is great. Okay, well, you can continue putting things in the in there, but how about we move on with our slides? And Asia, see, she reads my mind. So this was back to what we were talking about before, about that elephant in the room that, and actually when I took the provider course, we were talking about how there's sometimes this attitude that we're not wanting, as a farmer, not wanting to participate in the big capitalist society, but we want, you are providing a really great service, that, social benefits, environmental benefits, and many others. And how you conduct your business can be rooted in your values. You need to value your time also. And I recently was talking with some other bookkeepers, and someone described it as intentional exchange of money. There are groups out there, there are accountants and bookkeepers who are trying to change the attitude that we see so much, that it's all about profit and what profit is considered. So that's a little break from data, but that's like, we really want you to disconnect, not think that just because you're doing good, you can't make a decent living, and you have to do some deciding on what that is. So now we're going to jump right into the essential basic habits to run your farms. business finances. And this isn't in here, but one thing I will say is it's a different language. So I realized I was at a meeting the other day and I just went, oh, blah, 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 your P&L. And someone fortunately said, what's a P&L? It's your profit and loss statement. But bookkeepers, it's like accountants, anyone who's in the business will start talking things, and please stop them and get them to explain, because there is a different language. That said, oh, and actually one other thing I wanted to say before we did this, because these basic habits apply to however you're doing your bookkeeping, whether that's the shoebox method, and frankly, shoebox method is better than no method at all. Whether you're putting your money in folders and dealing with later, whether you've got a spreadsheet, whether you're working with one of the software. And I have to admit, I'm a QuickBooks Online person. So I decided a few years ago that that was where I was going and that was specializing. So you have to understand that I am a little prejudiced in that area, and that's also the area I'm most experienced in. That said, I've talked with kitchen table advisors, business advisors, and they have nice, simple spreadsheets for their clients for that you don't have to have software, because for some people, they're not quite there. When you're small, you can keep it, you can do it small, but there's a progression and you can move along and decide. The bottom line is, here are our central basic habits. Separate your money, your personal and your business finance. This sounds so basic, but every time that either of us talk to someone, we're going to say that, because it will make your life so much easier. And it doesn't have to be a business account. I've heard people, they're saying, well, I can't get a business account at the bank. Well, you can get another personal account and just run your business out of that other personal account, but keep it separate. Don't use your personal credit card for your business expenses. Don't use your business account for your personal expenses. It's these sorts of things that actually make bookkeeping complicated, and you can do it. So if y'all leave this all with one thing and you go out and make sure you're not commingling your finances, your life will be so much better. The second thing, and I do hope y'all don't think we're like talking down to you, but believe it or not, this is what we see. I see it I see it in nonprofits too. Not the current one that I'm in, but you are not alone. Save your receipts. I mean, every single receipt, and you can save it digitally. You can take a picture of it. You can write a note. And if you're putting it in the shoebox, write on it what it was and throw it in there. One step up is you put it in your shoebox, but your shoebox has a bunch of folders, and you put all the gas in here and you put all the farmer's market expenses in here. That's the third point there, categorizing your income and expenses. And the more you do that up front, when you incur the expenses or when you have income, the less you'll have to figure it out later on down the road. And that's in everything. I mean, actually, this is where, so I really like using software. And someone asked, was it worth using software? Someone asked about Xero, which is another QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online are the most common ones that you see out there. And that's because they've been around a long time. You'll see Xero around now. They're from Australia. They're making a big push here. I have looked at them, and there's one big farm, Full Belly Farm, who recently, believe it or not, they were on very old software. It was on their desktop. They couldn't update their desktop because the software wouldn't run anymore. And just they started 2 years ago, they decided to switch to Xero. The reason they did it, when I talked with them, was because their accountants wanted them to work with Xero. So some accountants and bookkeepers like working in a particular software. Xero's a little bit cheaper, but it all depends on what you need. I think that it's totally worth having software if you get to a certain point in your business, because you just put it in and it spits out all these wonderful reports, and as opposed to you having to figure it out yourself. So, but here's the thing, don't just jump into a software without talking to your tax accountant, talking with someone at FarmLink, someone who knows what they're doing, because it's not something you got to learn the software. You don't want to just jump into it without any experience. If you set it up incorrectly, you'll be paying for that for a long time. So setting it up is really important. And doing all of these things, separate your money, save your receipt, and categorize them, doing it regularly. Doesn't this sound so basic? I think all of us can do this. It's so basic. So those are really the four most important ones. We threw a bonus one in for you here, which is about collecting W-9s before contractor payments. And that's kind of there because I've been dealing with the 1099s, which are the tax forms that go out to contractors at the end of the year. Now, that's a whole big another conversation that we likely don't have time to get into that. But if you do have contractors, get their W-9s before you pay them. And then your end of the year will be quite a lot easier. So everything you do upfront makes your year end, your tax season a lot easier. And I know that's where we are right now. If you try and catch up with everything later, I know I'm repeating myself. I'm getting up on my soapbox, but just start with this and work with someone who can help you do it properly, especially at the beginning. So let's go on to the next slide, which is what is the result of all these basic habits that you do. So while Asia puts that up, look down at these questions. Let's see, is there a good template you can recommend for beginners, mid-level experience, and more experienced farmers? Well, we do have, FarmLink has a great chart of accounts template. And really, and then there are also templates for cash flow spreadsheets. So yes, we can absolutely recommend. I know KTA has those for its own clients. FarmLink has examples of those. And those are things like, if you can make the time to take like the Resilierator program, you get access to all those sorts of templates. You do not have to create them from scratch. So that's a little start. And we have a resources slide at the beginning of this with lots of links. And if we're missing anything you need, please feel free to email us. And how do I specialize in bookkeeping for farmers specifically? Well, frankly, you take the Resilierator course. There are also other courses. There are other people doing courses, but you're going to have to pay for them. And I really love the Resilierator. What FarmLink works with Kitchen Table Advisors, with Center for Land-Based Learning, and is trying to make things consistent so that if you're working for one, you can go to another one and they'll understand your chart of accounts, which we'll get to in just a moment. Too. So taking that course. So let's see, inventory. I was asked to provide an inventory, and we will get to your ones in your in the chat. It is easier if I'm just looking at the Q&A. So feel free to re-put them over in the Q&A. Inventory. I was asked to provide an inventory of farm equipment for a USDA FSA number. This ranch is 50 years old and has a ton of older equipment. What do I include? How many things should I include? Does this fit with bookkeeping? How should I inventory? Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother course too. But one thing I want to say is what the FSA is asking for, what a low, and Asia can actually speak more to this. And so feel free to jump in, is not always what you're going to have in your bookkeeping. And it's much easier when you buy the equipment and you know the value of it. But basically, actually, I was reviewing some of the information we did in our provider course with Poppy, and she said, you need to get a farm, I just blanked, Asia, what is it? You need to get a assessment.
Yeah, the resilience
appraisal, excuse me, appraisal is the word.
Okay.
You need to get an appraisal from someone who knows how to do a farm appraisal, and they will know whether things, because there's probably a lot of old stuff that's not very valuable. But how do you value your permanent crops, your orchards? So you need to get an expert in farm appraisals. That's something you just can't do yourself. So we do have a list of contacts, but we're really trying to make our list of service providers bigger. So if you know someone who's good at it, please chip in. Are there providers that help file taxes for a small farm LLC so we can avoid the high cost of a CPA firm? Have other people used Intuit service for LLC filings?
Can I chime
Yes,
in here?
and it depends. So we can talk a little bit more about that. That is a good question. There are some, but you do need to be careful because they need to understand farms and LLCs. For instance, another a thing that I have that's helping me experience all this is that my sons they grew up on a farm. They are now farming. They have their own farm for the last 2 years. And so I've been helping them do their LLC filing. So and that's something we're working on providing more of because, yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a little hard because unless you're really good at it, you probably don't want to do that yourself, even including through the Intuit thing, because it's not very farm friendly. We learned that the first time we did that. We did it through something called Tax Act. We did it ourselves, them and me. And everything, once you get into taxes, especially in the beginning, it's all a little more complicated. If you really are interested, you can read the IRS's Pub 225. It's 95 pages, tightly spaced. It's called the Farmer's Tax Guide. And that's what I've been doing a lot of. And it's fascinating and mind-boggling and complicated. So you do have to end up talking with someone. And Asia, did you have anything to add to that? Any of those questions? I'm sort of talking.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm just trying to keep track of copying the resources into the answers that you're answering live. So that's great.
Awesome.
And I was just gonna add, yeah, I think like the conversation that we come up a lot on is that there's the level of responsibility you have as the business owner, which for the most part involves these really basic systems. And like Francis was saying, bookkeeping is a specialized language, and your specialty might be the farming part of it. And so as much as possible, we encourage you all to do your part so that you can work with these professionals who can actually give you that specialized guidance and advice. And I know that part of what a value that we hold at FarmLink is that true viable businesses can afford to pay these professionals. And yeah, there is, like Francis was just describing, there's kind of no way around getting the advice from a CPA on tax strategy. And there's kind of no way around getting the advice from an attorney on entity structure because it's so personal. It's like business by business. So just want to echo that.
Yeah, and it's absolutely worth it. So I know there's still plenty more questions, but tell you what, we'll jump back into. So thank you so much, Asia, for putting that perspective on it. We'll jump back into, we wanted to just briefly touch on the 3 core financial statements, which most people are familiar with: the income statement, also known as the profit and loss, the P&L, P&L. You see it lots of ways: revenue and expenditures, if you're a nonprofit, is how it usually is. And that's your income, that's your expenses, what's left over at the end. But that's not the only thing you need to be looking at. That's a picture over time, usually over a year, a month. So you're assessing your business's well-being. But then there's the balance sheet, which is taking just a slice of, is looking at what your business is right now. It's cumulative and static, and that's more about your assets. It is about your assets, your liabilities, and your equity, which is what's left over. It's what you've got minus what you owe, what you got left over. And we talked a lot, there's a lot more on that in the slides that we did for last year. So what we didn't talk about so much is the cash flow. And I know there have been some questions about that. I want to mention, though, that when you talk about cash flow, to be really clear about what is called the cash flow statement, which you'll hear accountants refer to, in which there is there's a report called that in, if you're doing QuickBooks, and that's telling you over the year, like how much came in, how much went. It's actually kind of a complicated report to learn how to read. What most people really want, I mean, and it's important, but learn the other two first. And what most people really are talking about when they say cash flow is a cash flow budget or projection. And that's usually done in a spreadsheet. That's the way I've seen it. You have an Excel spreadsheet. FarmLink has one, KTA has one. They're pretty common to have, but that's a cash flow budget or projection. And it has, and that's tied to making a budget looking forward. That's, you start at the beginning of the year or at the beginning of any time, and you say, I think we're going to make this much next month, and then I think we're probably going to expend that much. Okay, now in February we're probably going to make that. I know we have this that we're going to have to expend on. There are all these columns for each month. You could do it for every week, and you put in it what you think you're going to make and what you think you're going to have to spend. So your income and your expenses. And on your cash flow, you include payments for loans and and for fixed assets like planting trees or buying a tractor or buying animals. So it's we don't really have time to go. You do need to take a course where someone will make you practice on these and explain all of them in detail, because the course, we can't do everything in an hour, basically. But that's another thing I really recommend that people do. And you don't have to have software to do it, other than you can have Google Sheets, you can have, Excel, you can even have, numbers on an Apple. So that is a really important one to have. And I'm looking, let's see. So I think that's pretty good about unless there's some specific questions about the reports. Do you see any specific questions about reports, Asia?
Nothing coming in. I think the remaining open question from Darlene about tracking personal loan for the business.
Right.
I know that
Oh gosh, can we keep that one in the queue and talk about that a little bit, later? So we don't have to get them all out of the way. So we did, before we also wanted another piece of the basics is the chart of accounts, which we've, and that's how in our earlier slide where we said you need to categorize your transactions to say what they are. That's the chart of accounts. And whether you're doing it in a spreadsheet or doing it in software, it's how you describe the things that you're doing. And they're basically 5 types, and that's the income, the expense, which show up on your profit and loss statement. And then there's the assets, the liabilities, and your equity. So there are 5. So if you just keep that pretty simple for starters, you do it. There is, as Asia said before, FarmLink has a model chart of accounts, which is, we'll have the link there. I think she's probably Asia is awesome. She's throwing links in there as we go. And there'll also be, a lot of them are in the slides. I would, yes, we're promoting FarmLink, but if you go onto their site, there are so many resources. You don't even have to be part of a program. Kitchen Table Advisors has resources. Center for Land-Based Learning has resources. So check out that chart of account. Once, as we said, we are trying to get it more consistent, because one of the big problems out there is the chart of accounts. If you set up QuickBooks Online and say you're agricultural, you don't want to use that chart of accounts. That is not for a small farmer. That's for big ag. It's not really right. You want to use a more appropriate chart of accounts. That doesn't mean to say you can't flow out from it and make it specific to what you're doing. But start with a good solid base. We're all about the bottom of the pyramid, getting it solid in the beginning. And it's much easier from then on. So now we're going to go on to the next one. We kind of have a fun little break here. So you can go, take a deep breath, shake out your stiff arms from sitting inside while it's beautiful outside, at least here in Davis. So Asia, tell us a little bit about this. And this, I will say one thing, this jumps back to where we were talking about people's attitudes towards money, a lot of small businesses and farmers particularly.
That's right. Yeah, thank you, Francis. It's been great. I think Francis and I share a shared perspective on our experience, and it's really motivating to us to dive deeper into these conversations because we are scratching our heads so often of, why is it so hard for small business owners to keep track of all these things? And we acknowledge that there is all of the outside external factors, we do live in a challenging system that is calling for your attention in all ways, but we also acknowledge that there's a lot of internal scripts that may be guiding how we relate to managing our finances. And so we wanted to share this resource with you. It's a cool little quiz called What Are Your Money Scripts? The link is here, and I will also drop it into the chat. So when you get a copy of the slides, you'll be able to access it, and there it is there for you in the chat now. Money scripts, they're learned in childhood, they're often unconscious, they can be passed down through generations. A lot of people are talking about intergenerational trauma these days. If that rings a bell for you, you may be able to relate that to that. They're just partial truths, but they are responsible sometimes for our financial outcomes, of course, in addition to the larger system that we work in. But some examples are there's never enough time or there's never enough money. And so I think part of the harm reduction that we're invested in is like, how can we shift our mindsets around the work that we have to do as small business owners, also while acknowledging the external factors that we hope can change and work to change. So just some graphics here about leading sort of frameworks on people's relationship to money that's really emerging these days. Trauma of money model, intergenerational trauma, scarcity versus abundance, all these themes that may be circulating and might seem a little wooey to folks, but there's a lot of deep psychology and research involved in them that's really valid. So we hope you can enjoy that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah. And, if you go through this like I did and you get to the end, they always want to know, they'll ask you questions about like yourself. Just make it up. And as long as you've got your email there, you can get it back. It's kind of fun just to see where you're going. So let's see, where next we're going to go talk about daily, monthly, quarterly, and year-end practices. And that's the other basic thing that we keep talking about is doing it regularly. And if you do it regularly, you're likely to actually find that it's easier and it actually overall takes less time and is less stressful. So, whoops, I seem to have got my sheets out of order. So first of all, we're going to talk about daily activities. And there's several, I know a couple of examples of people I've worked with who have decided that one person, she gets up every morning and she has her coffee and she opens up her QuickBooks. So she's doing this with QuickBooks. Someone else I know does it at the end of the farm day. You figure out your time, but you may not have to do this every day. You surely will not have to do all of these things every day. But if you do them every day or 3 times a week or even once a week, that's what my request would be. My hope would be that you do this at least once a week. I think that is reasonable and it will save you, like if you do it once a week and instead of waiting till the end of the month to catch up on the whole month, you will probably spend half as much time actually doing it and make better business decisions because you're not so far behind and knowing where your cash stands. So you're going to, and whether you're doing this in software or you're doing it in your spreadsheet, or you're just writing it down. I have to say, so this is where my prejudice comes. In the beginning, obviously, you just want to keep the records, but you can't really evaluate how you're doing unless you add everything up and create reports. You add up all your income, add up your expenses. So unless you want to do that manually, I would always put it at least into a spreadsheet so you can see where you are as it changes over time. And that's why I am unapologetically also a fan of software, because I think the time it saves you in the long run is good. But start with a spreadsheet if that's where you are. You're going to enter your payments. You're going to enter your bank deposits. I'll tell you, this is one of the things, if you don't enter your bank deposits, you might think it's all about expenses. It's about your income. You might find yourself like a few months down the line and you have no idea where your money came from, what you deposited at this. And it's really hard to go back and dig into the dirt. Not impossible, but it'll take you a lot of time. We have in here accounts payable. A lot of you probably just pay for everything as you get it. But as you get a little bigger and you have bigger expenses, you may buy from a provider of boxes or something, and they bill you, and then you pay them later. So you want to check on any bills you need to pay or any new bills you've received and make sure those are entered in your software, written down, put in your file folder, pay by next week. If you're using, I think most of you are invoicing customers. Some aren't because all your sales are direct. But if you're selling to a food hub, to a restaurant, to a wholesaler, to a grocery store, then you're probably not getting paid when you drop it off. You are invoicing them and then they're paying you later. And then if you have payroll, that's one obviously you don't do every day, because that doesn't happen every day. It depends on your payroll process. So those are possibilities of what you want to do every day so that you get the data in. And that's where we just, beat you over the head, get the data in. And then we'll move on to the monthly, because maybe you're doing this weekly. So that's still good. You're getting this done like 4 times a month. I would be happy with that, even though I'd prefer daily or whenever you've got something new to put in your books. Monthly practices are super important. You really have to do it. You can't really afford to do it less than monthly, because you won't know how much money you've got in your bank account, how much money you really have, what's going forward. And the biggest thing on your monthly work is doing bank reconciliations. And most people just kind of, that is also one of the biggest things I see, people behind on their bank reconciliations. You're like, well, I look at my online bank and see how much money, but you're not getting good reports. And the reason for people like me who grew up and we had check registers and we had to, match our check registers up. I can't even remember what we called it. Reconciling your check.
Balancing the checkbook?
Pardon?
Was it balancing the checkbook?
Balancing the checkbook. Yes. See, I don't do that either for my personal expenses, but I sure do it for business. And it's because here you've got your bank and here you've got your books. Everything that's in your bank account has to be in your books. That's pretty obvious. But what's less obvious is that you might have things in your bookkeeping system that are not on the bank statement. And some of them are good. I mean, are just fine. You wrote a check to somebody and they haven't cashed it yet, or something happened on the end of the month and it just didn't show up in that bank statement. But if you've got old data showing up in your bookkeeping system and it's not showing up here, like I've seen things from like the previous year, you've got a problem there. Or if you see duplicates of things, that's a problem. Your reports won't be accurate. You could be over or understating your income. You could be over or understating your expenses. So it's all these practices you do are to make sure you get the data in. And I think, I mean, we'd like to think that you would feel empowered, like you go out on your farm and you're walking around checking your plants. Well, you planted these seeds of your time and your money, and this is you checking up on your time and your money, how they're doing. You're also going to look at your accounts receivable if you're invoicing people. That's, your accounts receivable is when you invoice people who will pay you later. And you need to look and you're like, oh my gosh, they haven't paid. I better talk to them. Or, oh my gosh, they've paid, but it still looks like they're open. It wasn't applied properly. And that's a very important workflow. Accounts payable, if you have bills that you're going to pay later, oh shucks, it's the end of the month, 30 days. I've got to get that bill to so-and-so paid. And then the fun part, this really can be quite fun, is looking at your reports. You can look at how your business is doing. You can compare it to if you've got software, you can compare it to last year. You can compare it to what you hope it's going to be. You can look at the balances, what you've got in your bank account, because you should never just look at your online bank statement and say, oh, great, I've got $10,000 there, and forget that you actually wrote a check for $9,000 to, for your seedling starts. And then you go and you write another check for $4,000. And you actually don't have that money in the bank because it's gone as soon as the earlier check gets cashed. So you really need to do this to understand what you really truly have in your accounts. So that's monthly. Trying to
Can I share a quick
we have a
cautionary tale?
break here, don't we?
Yes, I was just going to share a quick cautionary tale that's brought to mind
Yes.
of when it comes to bookkeeping also, you might get what you pay for. For example, at some point we went the cheap route and tried to get a discounted service and ended up losing the money we paid the person to do the service because they were double counting what our transactions. So they were counting the checks that went out and then they were penalizing us also when the money was withdrawn. And we had to recover like $35,000 that were like,
Oh my goodness, Asia. Wow.
Yeah, so it does happen. I feel like when we talk about it like this, you're like, oh, I would never do that. No, it does happen.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good point. And we have some pointers on choosing your providers too, because you do need to be really careful about that. I hate to say it, not all bookkeepers, not all accountants are very good or understand small farms. So you're putting a lot of faith in them, and you still need to be looking at it too. But now we get to take a deep breath from our, I'll let you taste, since I'm just sorry, I gotta get Asia's wonderful viewpoint in there too. I try not to talk everybody's ear off.
No, Francis, you are sharing so much invaluable information, which is why we built in this pause. Let's take a deep breath and let it out. We just went through a lot of technical practices that everyone should be implementing in their business, and it can be a little overwhelming, but again, as long as you have a strong base, we really think you can be successful. And like what we're saying here is you have the ultimate responsibility for your business's finances, but we want your primary focus to be the part you enjoy. For some of you, that may be the bookkeeping. That's great. We're not worried about you. For those of you who it's the farming, we know that you're like not gonna do as well just in your own mental health and spirit if you're not doing the part that you like about your business. And that's part of our goal is we really want to support farmers to get their business to a place where you can afford working with an accounting professional, legal professional, to support you. And that's the part also that emphasizes how individualized each of your businesses is, because what kind of business owner are you? Without judgment, only honesty. What parts do you like to do? What parts do you not like to do? No matter what other business owners might be doing around you, you got to figure that out for yourself and commit to, of course, the baseline items, but maybe you do want to do the bookkeeping. Great. You're going to have to spend more time learning this specialized language, less time farming likely. But there are also professionals who you can partner with so that you can do more of the farming if that's your preference.
Absolutely. And I have this little dream in my head, which this seems like a good time to throw out there. If you happen to be a farmer who has some off time or just can't always be out in the field, I would love you to learn, and you turn out that you actually like doing this.
Mhm.
Learn bookkeeping, take bone up on it, because there aren't enough bookkeepers and accountants who understand small farms. And that could be a nice side gig for you in times that are slow. You can help your own business, you could help other farmers. So just putting it out there for you. Yeah. So in Asia, we do have some tips about uh, that I'm going to let Asia talk to, because these are some more wonderful resources from FarmLink. And I'm sorry, I hope we don't sound like, you always get those free webinars and all they do is try to sell you something, but we aren't selling. We're just saying, get some help, use the free help that's available to you, because it's, if you think the big corporations get successful without asking for help, they don't. So you deserve to be helped too. And there are lots of resources.
That's right. Yes. And so this is one of the free resources that we offer. We have I can actually copy and paste that link too for the general resource page, but it's also messy in there. So we're trying to point you to the things that are relevant. But some tips to vet a professional for your farm business, as you can see from the slide, it's a checklist. It's about 2 or 3 pages. That's just a good tool to take with you. Unfortunately, finding people to work with you for your business is like an interview process. You got to make sure it's the right fit for them and for you, and you don't have to just go with the first person you talk to. So having this checklist is helpful with some key questions you could ask them, and then you can make a decision knowing that you conducted like a uniform process and asked everyone the same questions, right? You didn't forget anything. So that's awesome. And then there's also a tax organizer that is super helpful. It's essentially an outline for us as the business owners of how to put our documents together. And then it asks you a bunch of key questions that are not for us to understand as the business owner, but essentially you take it to your tax preparer, and based on your answers to those questions, they'll know just how to fill out your tax forms. And then they will have the checklist that you had turned into them with this tax organizer. So we don't have the link for that yet, but we can email it as soon as that goes live online, because we are in the heart of tax season now. So it's never too early to start thinking about what your plan's going to be.
That's so true. Never too early. So super. Thank you, Asia. Hey, you know what? I think we're going to just skip through very quickly the quarterly and year-end practices, because I'm watching the time and I'm seeing lots of questions I still want to answer. I mean, and they're pretty well written out in the slides. You can reread them, and they're kind of specific to certain situations. So let's just, do you feel okay with that, Asia?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
skip through the
agreed.
quarterly and the year-end practices, which brings us to, actually, I tell you what, this is from Sydney at Tall Pines Ranch, right, in Grass Valley. So I'm going to answer that in just a second. This was a complicated one. But first, we'll get the 2 that are in Q&A. The easy one, anonymous attendee. How many years can you not make a profit before the IRS starts having a fit? Well, we actually discussed that in our provider thing. And there's sort of maybe like 5 years. They're trying to figure out whether you're a hobby farmer or not. But there are 2 things that you can to keep in mind. One is that profit is not always like that you end up with money. Are you increasing your assets? That is also considered to be successful. So if you can show you're increasing assets, you're buying land, you're planting trees, that can help. The other thing is, remember we said keep your personal and your your personal and your business finances separate. If you keep them together, if you commingle them, they will come after you. If you want to show that you are sincere and it's not just a hobby, keep your books separate. Keep your bank accounts, your credit cards, your bookkeeping separate. That is huge. That is a sign to the IRS that you are seriously running a business, not just a hobby. So that's, yeah, I feel very strongly about it. You should take a course with Poppy. Poppy will make you feel strong and empowered because she does all this work in the background, because that's what you need. It's too complicated to figure out all the answers on your own. So Darlene asks, what is the best way to keep track if you had to take a personal loan for the business? Our intent is to make the monthly payments from the business account. Not sure if there's a better way. I kind of think that's one that we might, if you want, we could talk about offline. Because it's a little complicated. That's, I don't know. Do you have a quick and easy one on that, Asia?
I don't, I'm just thinking of our cash flow template where you like record, but that's, it's
I'd have
not.
to actually think about that. And Darlene Ruiz,
Yeah.
I have a feeling. We'll
I owe Darlene an email, so I can loop you in and we can.
okay, we will get back into you, because that brings up a point that there is, when you're making, that's the part about equity. And when you put your own money into the business, and you really just please get some help about that, because if you do it right in the beginning, and it's kind of complicated, which leads to Sydney's question, when we sent out an email asking for questions, we did get one from Sydney at Tall Pines Ranch in Grass Valley. And she said, I'd love to talk about the different methods of accounting for breeding stock on balance sheets and the pros and cons for both. They're raising dairy goats. And I looked up their web. So they're raising dairy goats to sell the goats themselves. And Asia and I have reached out and tried to get some answers to these questions. So they were saying their value tends to appreciate to a certain age, and then they depreciate after. What are our options for accounting? And the value of dairy goats varies drastically by region, is different from meat goats. How do we validate our valuation on our balance sheets? That is a super complicated one that you do absolutely have to talk to a CPA. And this is something you really need to do right off if you buy land, start land, you need to start figuring out your assets, whether they're permanent crops are sounding kind of easy to me compared to animals. Animals are complicated because, especially if you're breeding them, you've got your goats, and that's kind of easy. You put it in the asset at its value, you bought it. But then there's all sorts of questions about, how does it increase in value? When is it at maturity, and how much do you decrease it? And there is guidance in Pub 225, but it's just very general to goats. And you need to know regional, and you need to know what you're doing with your goats. You're milking them, you're reselling them, they're for meat. It all is different and complicated. And then there's the even more complicated question. Your goats have baby goats, and you want to keep them for your breeding stock. So they are an asset. You're not selling them. It's like, oh my gosh, now what do we do? How do we value this? And frankly, we're still working on that question. We looked up all sorts of things. We asked a bunch of people, and we haven't gotten a final definitive answer on that one. So we'd be happy to talk further with you about that, Sydney. And as we learn these things, we will share them. So that was the question and answers in the that we had in the Q&A. So I'm now sort of looking back through the chat.
Yeah, I was scrolling up and I can read you the first question that came up.
Yeah.
Well, I guess Emily Garcia said, I want to know how bookkeeping for a farm business differs. And I was going to share with her the model chart of accounts.
Absolutely perfect. Yeah, so that's a big part, the chart of accounts.
Someone, Anya Weatherly asked, I'm trying to understand best practices for farm specific accounting and how I can strategically plan cash flow / tax benefits, etc.
Right. And that's all about using a cash flow budgeting projection spreadsheet. That's which I think, is there a link for that on FarmLink, or is it something that people get when they take the Resilierator?
The cash flow template.
Cash flow template.
As of now, that's only available when you take the Resilierator.
Yeah, and you know, I think the reason why that is the case is that I talked with our local business advisor at KTA, and there are all sorts of formulas in the spreadsheet, and so they don't want to just give it out there to someone, because if you mess up the formulas, it messes it up. You won't get correct data, and they don't want to be responsible for your bad data. So I would say working with someone to get a cash flow spreadsheet, and that will work into your tax. Well, the tax benefits is often more about assets. So your cash flow helps you decide when you're going to purchase assets. Holy schmoly. Shall we put onto the screen, the next screen with the resources, just so people can be looking at, Asia, what is the course of the Resilierator course? What is the
Yes.
cost?
The cost is $200. And we offer, though, that if you complete, I think, like 90% of the classes, if you attend 90% of the classes, you'll get that course cost refunded. And I will also type the answer.
That's great. I was noticing someone, Lisa asked about how detailed for the expense tracking. And it depends, but frankly, getting too detailed is not a good thing, but you kind of have to get as detailed as what you need. So it's good to start less detailed. You don't want that's easier if you work with a provider on taxes or doing your bookkeeping, but you got to make it work for you too. So I actually just want to quickly run through. We have these resources with links. We'll post the PDF of this, which will have the links in it too. This is limited to our pretty much our nonprofit people we're coordinated with, like FarmLink does a lot of work with kitchen table advisors, with Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and the Center for Land-Based Learning. Not to say that's a complete list. I know there's lots more, but those are all nonprofits who have resources they can offer, like Kitchen Table Advisors. If you get into their 3-year cohort where they do business advising for free for you for 3 years, it's a commitment, but it's a lot of help. Center for Land-Based Learning is known for their starting programs, and I know they work with getting some information, some teaching from sources that run through all of these organizations. There you've got your link for the model chart of accounts. Some of these are a little old, but they still are good data because they're more about the big picture. The ones that have to do with QuickBooks Online are good theoretically, but that is one of the things people don't like about QuickBooks. And I'll jump in there because there were questions about software in Asia, software and Xero, QuickBooks Online. The thing in QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online is kind of where most people I know are using, but you do have to have a good internet connection. You do have to learn it. I think the people who get upset with it is you have to have some basic training on how to use it first. That's true for desktop too. That's true for Xero too. But I just lost my train of thought. But the QuickBooks Online changes all the time. And also I do want to say to you, do not go out there and just buy QuickBooks Online Xero, certainly not QuickBooks Desktop, without talking to a service provider, because most people, most organizations, most bookkeepers, accountants have discounts that are available that are for better than what you just get online. And you can make sure that you get the right level because they all have different levels. Let's see. Yes. The model chart of accounts. Well, maybe we can, that's interesting. On my computer where I don't have, my home computer where I don't have don't have Excel, it opens up on Sheets. It's on my Mac, but we can check that.
That's a good point, Francis. If you cannot open it in Excel on your computer, you
Mhm.
can upload the downloaded file into Google Drive and open it in Google Sheets, and you should be able to access it that way. But feel free
Okay.
to email us if that doesn't work for you. And
Yeah, please. If I know we're starting to we're coming down to the last few
Yeah.
minutes, so if we haven't covered something, I feel like I haven't said everything I wanted to. Oh, I do want to say small business development centers in Northern California. Do check those out because they have free resources. And I work some with the Shasta Cascade one. And at our last meeting, they said, please promote us. There are different ones in different parts of the state. They said, we've got plenty of money now and we need more people to come ask us. They do a lot more than financial bookkeeping work, but they're a great resource. I think Anne about the Resilierator,
yeah, I can
please get in touch with them and see how firm that is.
Yeah, I can speak to that question. Since you have experience, we would just ask you basically like what that experience was and sort of do an individual assessment of if it feels like that you would have a good enough understanding of the business back end to sort of know what we're addressing in the course. And so you being a new business is not an issue. It's about the experience. So yeah, do reach out.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And I know we're going to, so I do want to say, please, y'all, please do email us. We are serious. I would be happy to talk with any of you without any commitment or anything for, whatever, like a half an hour or something for questions you have, pro bono, because we really want this to make a difference and to make your businesses work better. And there's more than we can really say in this small period of time.
Yes.
And yes, and
Francis,
Jody, that's the same part. What is considered a business? That's a conversation that will take more than a few minutes because nothing is cut and dried, I hate to say.
Yeah. Someone mentioned they are afraid they've already messed up their bookkeeping. What's the right way to get back on track? What would you say to that?
It's to work with someone. So I would definitely get in touch with me because even if I've been trying to collect people, and actually they're on this link, the FarmLink crowdsource list has some lists of people who have been recommended by maybe Resilierator or people who took Resilierator. It jumps to attorneys first, but there's a bookkeeper's accountants section. But I also have been gathering some other people that can, who know farms and would be willing to work with farms. So you do need someone to help you, but it depends on how you're doing your bookkeeping. So shoot me an email and we can talk and I can refer you to a few people, something like that. Oh, I see Guido.
All right, yes.
Guido. We're
We
out
just
of
need to start
time.
wrapping up.
Sorry we couldn't answer all your questions, y'all, but do contact us and
Yeah.
thanks for being here.
And I'm sorry to be the bad guy who's kicking everyone out, but because we have so many workshops, one after the other, we do need to make sure that we end up on time, so then the people coming after have time and so on. Anyways, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. If you have any closing remarks, this is your time. I know that you mentioned a couple of times that people can get in contact with you, that you're going to send some resources. But if there's anything else.
We're just keep farming. We love having you farming and doing your job. Thank you for being here on a beautiful day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kath, for putting this on.
Awesome.
Asia? Emails are in the chat. Really don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, and grab a copy of these slides when we post them on the session.
Okay.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. And we have more workshops coming, so tune in.